I'd say the most common question I get asked in real life, both from patients, just also tennis players I know, is what is the shoe that I recommend the most to people? And the answer is, by a country mile, the Diadora Blushield Torneo 2. Here's why. And just before I answer that question about these shoes, just remember that doesn't necessarily mean I think they're the greatest shoes ever or that they're the best ones for you. They're just the ones that I most commonly recommend to people. And also thank you to Tennis Point USA for sending me a pair of these to check out, both the hard court and the clay version as well. If you want to check them out, leave them in the link in the description below. Now, one of the biggest reasons I recommend the Torneo 2 is the tongue, actually. The tongue on these is super padded, but it's also super ventilated. It has these giant air channels, these giant circular air channels that go through it. It protects the top of your foot, even if you want to crank down on the laces. Now, the Torneo 2 has a pretty aggressive runner's knot you can put in there, so you can really crank this thing down around your ankle. And for a shoe with as much heft as it has around the ankle and the ankle collar, which we'll talk about, I usually am going to be using the runner's knot on these. However, I think it just really utilizes kind of the best in breathable technology with also molding technology. I mean, if you look at the breathability test on these, heated up 119.1 degrees, cooled down another 53.1 degrees. But for a shoe with this much protection on it, I honestly don't think that's that terrible because, you know, all the way around the toe box, going all the way into the medial side of the shoe, you have 2 layers of really thick molding for even someone that's going to drag a ton. Look at the upper durability test on these 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Like most Diadora Blushield Torneo or Blushield 5, whatever shoes, 4s, whatever, the burr gets through that initial layer of molding, but it doesn't get nearly all the way through even like the first level of that molding. So even though it might look a little weird, the integrity is really well just because there is so many layers of drag guard on this shoe. And the other thing that molding does is, you know, it actually protects the front part of your foot. It also holds the structural integrity of the shoe pretty well, so the shoe doesn't want to buckle underneath of you when you're making really hard cuts or when all of your body weight is going one way and you gotta haul the other direction. It's the other thing I like about it. The other thing is it creates a nice stable base if you want to pad the inside of the shoe. You want to put moleskin in or adhesive felt to more customize that. I am actually working on a little sheet on how you can actually customize the inside of your shoe with that, so make sure you're looking out for that. But suffice it to say that molding does a lot more than just protecting against drag. But what is by far the biggest unsung hero of the uppers is what is on the inside of them. Number one, you get a combined internal and external heel counter, which means you get a solid piece of plastic going about 270 degrees around the ankle, which really gives you a ton of support, especially against torsion going side to side. But then internally, you have a standard heel counter as well. Those 2 heel counters work so well in keeping the structural integrity of the shoe, just like that molding. But when you are twisting and turning, especially when someone's hitting behind you, that's why these shoes just keep their ground so well versus others. But also on the inside of the tongue, the gusset on it is super high up in the shoe. So when you put your foot in, that tongue and the gusset of that tongue, which connects it to the strobo board, really kind of just hugs your foot down into that shoe. If you want a shoe that just has so much stability underfoot, even if you're not that stable, you know, especially like someone like me whose footwork's gotten really goofy as I've gotten older and heavier, this shoe will kind of mask a lot of that just because it is so darn stable underfoot. And then that really does kind of continue into the midsole. Because when you look in the midsole, number one, most of the midsole is a pretty dense EVA foam going all the way from the heel into the midfoot. But once you hit the midfoot, you get all of that Blushield from the midfoot into the forefoot. Now, Blushield isn't anything revolutionary in terms of material science, but what it really is revolutionary on is the ergonomics of it, right, or the biomechanics of it. And that's because it's these nubs with these little kind of concentric circles going all the way down. And what that does is those concentric circles that get tinier or more narrow as you get more distal into the shoe, is when you come down on that, those nubs are able to move in any and all directions on there, and that's where you get all of that shock absorption. And that's why Blushield in the forefoot feels so good to so many people, because it accommodates so many different things. If you have big toe joint arthritis, if you've got lumps and bumps on the bottom of your foot, kind of an uneven surface like most people have on the bottom of their foot, any prominences, flat foot, high arched foot, that, number one, is going to absorb all of those kind of little idiosyncrasies of your foot, as well as all the shock that's coming down it from, you playing tennis. And that's why the most interesting part of the Torneo 2 is its bounce height test readings. It comes in at 29.5 centimeters in the heel, which I think is pretty standard for a pretty dense EVA, but then only 26.5 in the forefoot, and you can just see how the ball bearing just kind of dies on that Blushield, and that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to absorb all that shock. So you can see, there's a lot of shoes out there where, like some Nikes where you put Zoom Air in the forefoot and that ball bearing just bounces really high, and that's great if you want bounce out of it. However, that ball bearing test, that bounce height test, also can show the shock absorbing capabilities of a shoe. One of your metatarsal heads comes into that Blushield, that's going to happen. That shock gets dispersed and you don't feel it. It's the Blushield that's dispersing it. But opposite of the uppers of the Torneo 2, I think the biggest unsung hero of the midsole comes in the periphery with its shank. Number one, comes really far distal on the lateral side, almost meets the external heel counter, then also is very broad here on the inside or medial side of the shoe. Because it's on both sides of the shoe, acts more as like a cradle or a harness versus just one flat piece of plastic as a shank. And getting into the outsole tread, I really don't think it matters if you're on hard clay or carpet. The Torneo 2 really is just an absolute beast when it comes to its outsole tread. The traction is just that of a monster truck. The herringbone on this is deep. It is really tough. You look at the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, not even a millimeter of damage on the herringbone of the clay sole. Usually the clay soles are a little bit softer than the hardcourt soles. On the hardcourt soles, same thing, not even a millimeter of damage. The durometer on both is nice and high. The more flat herringbone on the all-court version obviously works a little bit, better on hardcourts, allows you to slide if you want to, or grab if you want to as well. Obviously, if you are looking for a herringbone shoe on a hardcourt, although I don't really recommend that, I think you can hyperextend a knee really easily. Some people really like that. The herringbone on the Torneo 2 as well as the Nike Vapor Pro 2 clay, I think are probably the best ones out there right now in terms of clay treads on a hard court. If you look at the speed ratio on them, comes in at a 1.85, which obviously is not the greatest out there. However, I will say, if you look at the flange on these things, it is so aggressive, especially on the clay sole version where you literally just get these razors here on the lateral flange. These things will cut if you want them to cut. They turn on a dime. And like I said, because of how structurally sound the uppers are and the midsole is, if you are someone that brings your own speed to the table, brings a little bit of a stronger leg to the table, this thing is going to allow you to kind of extract the most speed that your own body can produce. And just like I said, because the flange on these is so aggressive, if you are looking to cut, move the other direction, play more of an all-court game, a retrieving game, just a really grinding type baseline game, these things are pretty much the most rugged thing out there. And getting into the fit of the Torneo 2s, now from the 1s to the 2s, there were just a couple changes. Number one, it's the Ortholite liner on these. It does have some different densities of foam in there and a little bit of like a double density in the heel. Remember, this is going to bottom out, so I mean, a lot of times people are just switching this out either for something like a flat socks or a power step or a move or a custom orthotic or whatever, so it's fine. However, in the Torneo 2, they still do fit pretty bulbous. So narrow, medium, wide foot, I think just go true to size 4. You can just go up 1/2 size. I didn't find all that much difference in terms of fit from the 1s to the 2s. If you're a 2E looking for a little bit more room, I guess you can just go up 1/2 size, that's fine. In terms of the snake bitten foot, I think with an orthotic in these are probably the best on the market for any lumps, bumps, or bruises, especially in the forefoot with that Blushield. Like I said, it's going to absorb a lot of shock, and it's also going to accommodate a lot of, like I said, just a lot of things you could be bringing to the court. Unbelievably forgiving, but also they give you a little something back too. So if you are somebody that's hobbling a little bit, looking for a shoe that can, I shouldn't say mask it because you shouldn't be playing if you're injured, but like I said, something that can almost mask those kind of symptoms. The Torneo 2 is like wearing an armored tank. And speaking of all those lumps, bumps, and bruises, if you are someone that is having trouble getting back on court, have not been able to get a good answer as to what is going on with your feet, and just trying to get back to playing tennis pain-free, haven't been able to get a good answer because you haven't found someone that lives and breathes this community like you and me, I do have one-on-one consulting as a link in the description below. Check that out. And getting into the all-important playability, and probably the number one reason that I recommend these is because you're getting all this protection, right? All this forgiveness in this shoe, but also it plays like a champ. I think number one, the lateral flange is probably the best part of this shoe in terms of how well it can cut and how stable it is. Number two, it's the combined internal and external heel counter. Like I said, it gives so much torsional stability to someone as a baseline grinder. Someone who's playing an all-court game and kind of needs to be able to plant their foot in some pretty awkward positions, this thing will keep you pretty stable. As well as someone that's serving and volleying. I mean, if you are diving for a ball or you really have to have a really aggressive cross step, right? Try to get low for like a forehand volley, or if you're trying to scoop backhand volleys up off the ground, you need something that, like I said, can get very stable on the ground and keep your body a little bit more square, so that way you can get a little bit more deft touch on the ball. This is really great, especially if you're on a really slick like clay court, if you're on really slick paint outdoors. This is going to give you so much more of that torsional stability. I know I keep saying torsional stability all over, but it is just worth mentioning over and over again how much of it you can get on this shoe, even if you yourself are not the most stable player out there. And I think that's why I recommend them so much too, because shock during tennis is usually what is going to be causing the most problems for you. And so if there's a shoe out there that can kind of mitigate a lot of those external type issues you can get, as well as kind of accommodate all the internal things you can bring to a court, well, that's going to be a really popular shoe for really any foot doctor, right? Any foot doctor that, knows anything about tennis shoes. So that's why I like them so much. That's why I recommend them so much. That's why they usually find themselves somewhere on my top 5 videos or always in the categories of the Ultimate Tennis Shoe Buyer's Guide. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Are you still playing these, or have you switched ships to the Wave and Force Tour? Because I've liked those. Some of the more maximalist New Balance shoes that have come out recently, like the CT Rally that's come out. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want to see the younger sibling to the Diadora Blushield Torneo 2, the Diadora B Icon 2 going to the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect, rubber, and foam. I know I was very animated in this video. I just get very passionate about the Torneo line. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.